Let's talk about the 10 best neutral paint colors from Behr Paint. And this is according to Behr themselves, because I stumbled upon an article on the Behr Paint website where they're discussing their paint trends moving forward and what are some of the best neutrals that they have to offer. We're going to go through these colors, I'm going to give you my thoughts, and then I'm going to give you my favorite neutrals currently by Behr Paint moving into 2024. I'm James, the color guy, and if we haven't met before, nice to meet ya. If you haven't subscribed yet, press that button to stick around because we put a ton of content a week on interior design and paint color and color theory. It is absolutely my passion. And normally we don't do reaction videos like this on this channel. We do them a lot on our Patreon channel. So if you want to check it out in the description, we have exclusive content there for our Patreon supporters. And if you become a Prime member, you get your own personalized mini color palette from me every 3 months. So quarterly, essentially. So if you want more information, check that out down below. But let's get into this video. What are neutral paint colors colloquially? How do we define them as people? Well, typically in the paint world, neutral paint colors are going to be a little more muted, softer, desaturated. So they're not going to be this bright green behind me. They're more so going to be the color of sand, or those beigey colors, light grays, off-whites, things of that nature. There is a more technical way of describing neutrals, which can be a little more complicated and might confuse people. So we'll just leave the actual scientific color theory side out of this one. When I'm talking neutrals in this sense, I'm talking about these muted colors, the more passive, versatile paint colors that exist. So let's get into these choices by Behr Paint. The first one being Antique White, which is a pretty timeless color, I find. It has some lovely warmth to it, a touch of a beiginess, and I think it's very, very versatile. It has a 73 light reflectance value, which means it's basically scoring a 73 out of 100 on the lightness scale. That's the easiest way I can describe it to you. Antique White, kind of creamy, a slight yellow undertone that's present sometimes, but just like all these colors, your mileage may vary depending on your house, how your lighting is set up, what kind of flooring you have. There's a lot of factors that go into this. Next up is Off-White, and this is a paint color with a very intriguing name to me because it just essentially describes what it is. It's not white, it's an off-white. It has a bit of gray and a bit of beige. It has a 76 LRV, so a little bit brighter, less saturated than Antique White. There's also going to be less of that visible yellow happening, so I find this color to be a little more modern feeling or contemporary because of that touch of gray to sort of tone it down. Not to say that Antique White doesn't get used anymore. It does quite heavily, I would say, but Off-White just gives you a little more options. So if you are a little more transitional or you want to sort of lean into those cooler colors without going with like a blue or a steely gray, Off-White is a great choice as just a go-to paint color. Navajo White is a color that I enjoy quite a bit. It shares a lot of similarities to Antique White based on my experience with it. It has a 74 LRV, so maybe a touch brighter, but Navajo White maybe sometimes feels like it has a tiny bit of a peachy quality sometimes in comparison to Antique White. That's when you're sort of comparing them together side by side. Very, very subtle difference. So I would almost put them in the exact same category, to be honest. A bit of a redundant color, I would say, in this list. A more traditional-ish color because of its heavy lean on beige. Linen White is up next, and this is an interesting one because it kind of also has that beigey, creamy quality to it, but it also has an 85 LRV. So that is very, very bright. Not quite as bright as you can go in terms of light reflectance value. That would be, you know, your 93, 94. Those are kind of your caps when it comes to bright whites. 85 is light, but it's not going to look like a bright, bright, stark neutral white. There is warmth to it. That being said, because it's so bright, it won't feel as saturated as the other colors we've talked about. So it can be a clean slate color that just happens to lean towards the warm side of things. If you love warmth, if you have warm floors and you want to lean into it, or maybe you have more of a cooler kind of floor or a neutral floor and you want to brighten things up on the walls, Linen White is a pretty strong choice, I would say. Okay, next is Dove. This is a color that I can vibe with. It is the first true grayish color so far on this list, and that is essentially just a combination of gray and beige. And I find that combination to work really, really well. Beige sort of leans a little more towards the traditional. Gray is a little more contemporary. I mean, not really, but you can kind of look at it that way. So the two together bridges the gap essentially. I find that you can pull from so many different places inspiration-wise, both old and new. So that's why colors like grayish are so powerful at connecting those dots, being that glue color. Dove also has a 66 LRV. So far the darkest color on this list, but I don't think it's too dark. Like, I don't think you need to be thrown off by it or scared of it. 66 is still pretty light in the grand scheme of things when it comes to paint colors. So pretty big fan of that, especially for those of you that aren't looking for something creamy and yellowy and orangey almost. This one is a true grayish, and it just does the job in a lot of circumstances. So the next neutral we're talking about is Cottage White. Now, this is another color that seemingly is another redundant choice when compared to Linen White. Both of these colors are in the 80s LRV-wise. So that's pretty bright. Linen White had 85. Cottage White, on the other hand, has 82. So a little more depth, a touch more saturation, but I find Cottage White to be a bit more user-friendly because it's not leaning into this heavy yellow sort of undertone. Cottage White feels a little bit softened with a bit of a honey kind of aspect. There's maybe a touch of beige that mellows out the yellow, which I think is pretty useful. It gives it a little more versatility to me, and especially as a wall color, because it is slightly darker than Linen White, it means it's probably going to be easier to apply on the walls. Because if you've ever worked with paint, if you've ever tried to paint your walls white, to do it properly, it can take 3, 4, sometimes 5 coats, depending on the product you use. I'm a fan of it, especially compared to Linen White in terms of overall usability. Next up, we have White Veil, which of course is named after a wedding veil. This is another color similar to Cottage White. It has this slightly honey, kind of honey gold undertone, not super yellow leaning, like not like a highlighter or anything like that. The main difference here, of course, is the 88 LRV. So that is very bright, the brightest color we've talked about so far. I wouldn't even maybe call it an off-white at this point. It's pretty much a white, even though it is adjusted with that little bit of a gold touch to it. That just makes it feel quite nice, to be honest. You can treat this as a white paint color for whatever you're painting, whether it's your walls, good luck, or your trim or your doors, ceilings. Just be aware that it's not going to be a crisp, stark, neutral white, you know, one of those gray kind of looking whites, or even a blue leaning, or even just a white white. This isn't that. So next up is Spanish Sand. So this is officially the darkest color yet because it has a 64 LRV, or light reflectance value. That means it's reflecting 64% of the light that hits it, which is, you know, a little more than half. I find this kind of place, lightness-wise, to be very, very good as a wall color because it's going to give you a definite amount of contrast with your lighter, whiter trim, but it's not going to be so dark that it's going to limit where you can use it in your home. So even if it's a room that is perhaps a bit more dimly lit, maybe doesn't have a ton of windows, this color shouldn't look too dark in that space because, again, it's in that low 60s range that I find to be very, very versatile when it comes to paint colors. Interestingly enough, Behr puts this in the white color family, but it's a neutral, right? It has this beige, it has a bit of a gold brown undertone to it, a bit mellowed out with a touch of gray as well. So very, very passive color, easy breezy, beautiful. CoverGirl, not sponsored. That would be a weird sponsor for this channel. Next up, we have Crisp Linen, which Behr describes as a true beige. A perfect neutral that suggests serenity and classic beauty. To some people, being a perfect neutral is kind of a diss because neutrals tend to be fairly boring. I don't personally think that. I think all paint colors serve a purpose and I find that beautiful. But I gotta say, Crisp Linen, when I look at it, it doesn't do much for me. It is very, very, very neutral. Like, it doesn't even feel that beige to me. It is kind of a grayish leaning color because it is very much toned down, yet I think that can serve a good purpose. So if you are looking for a color that makes no statement because you want it to blend into the background and be a canvas for whatever cool artwork you're maybe putting up or pictures of your family, Crisp Linen isn't going to step on any toes. It's not going to pull focus or anything like that. And it's perhaps a better alternative to plain white walls, which may look a bit too stark in certain circumstances, unless you're into Scandi design and you love that white sort of minimal look. So this Behr paint color has the best name on the list for sure. It's called Even Better Beige. Can't get any better than that, right? This is the darkest color on the list for sure, and it's at the end of the list. It's a 60 LRV paint color, so that is very much on the light mid-tone side of things. darker than Spanish sand, also a little bit cooler. Like, it doesn't have Spanish sand's clear kind of gold undertone happening. Even Better Beige has even more gray. So it sort of pushes it a little more towards grayish territory, but not so much that it feels like a gray. So it maintains its beige status, which it better. I like this paint color quite a bit for this list because of its versatility. It does have that kind of cool, but still definitely warm leaning vibe to it, which is quite useful. But all that being said, these top 10 neutrals presented by Behr, I don't necessarily agree with them being awesome choices, and they don't even really do a good job at showing the full gamut of what neutrals can be. But there is no doubt that warmer neutrals tend to be more popular than cooler neutrals. So I'm gonna leave you with 3 colors from me. One is from this list. It's my favorite neutral from this actual article. And then I'll give you my favorite off-white and my favorite white by Behr Paint. If I were to pick one from the article that I really enjoyed, it's actually Dove, which is pretty much the coolest leaning color on this list. But I find it just does such a great job at giving you options. It's flexible, it's adaptable, so it's a paint color that you can put on your walls, and even if you change out your furniture next year or some of your decor, it's a color that should still look fine. It's not too beige heavy, it's not overly gray, it just sort of toes the line. So that's my choice. My favorite off-white these days is Cameo White, and what I love about it is it's barely white, like it's an 81 LRV paint color, so kind of still pretty bright for walls, but you can totally justify using it. What I love about it is it has gray mixed with a tiny bit of brown in it to give you this slightly taupey feel. It almost looks like a touch purple in some lightings, but it's so subtle and so soft, and I just find it very awesome and interesting and a great alternative to like a creamy white or just a plain old stark white. Now, if you wanted a plain white, there's no better white paint color by Behr than Polar Bear. And the bear is spelled B-E-A-R in the color. Bit of a missed opportunity in my mind. Why not just use the company name? But might be too confusing that way. Who am I? I'm James the Color Guy, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want more videos like this, check out our Patreon, because I react to articles that you guys send me every single Sunday, pretty much. So check the description down below, and I'll see you there. But for now, we have more videos right over here.